watching Inside Politics. Thank you for staying with us. Any comments, thoughts on the topics we're discussing? Text us on 22155. Tweet us at Akisa Wandera at KTN News KE. The hashtag to use is KTN Politics. At about 12:30, we'll be inviting your calls. We'll be picking your thoughts on this. So the numbers will be on your screen for you to engage with us, even as we dissect the big political events in the country and beyond. And just before we went on a break, we were looking at the expectations for the State of the Nation address that the President is expected to deliver to both houses of Parliament on a Thursday next week. I think that's about the 15th, not very sure about that. But Mark Bichachi have to give you the right of reply, because just before we went on a break, your co-panelists seem to think that you have well decorated the Jubilee report card, but it's not representative of what's going on. As people would say, kwa ground vitu ni different. I mean, what do you have to say about that?
Well, I'm quite ashamed, really, that's what my co-panelists thought. Because when I mentioned GDP growing from 44 billion to 100 billion, the only right question to ask after that is how many Kenyans are escaping poverty as a percentage of GDP growth. And I'll tell you, that is 4.5 million Kenyans escaping poverty every year. Number two, I'll give you another figure. The poverty index for this country dropped from 46.8% to 36%. If we are looking also for real figures in terms of how much money has been returned to the public coffers, as at my last count, we were at about 4 billion shillings returned by individuals. Have there been people who've been put in jail in the fight against corruption? Yes, quite famously, an MP called Welige. So when we begin to say that there's no good news in our country, I do not stand by that. I'm not saying there's no poverty. There's 36.8% poverty. Are we doing something about it? Yes, we are. Do I choose to be proud about what my country is doing right? Yes, I am. But do I also denigrate the corruption and the poverty that we still need to fight? Of course I do.
Right. I believe you meant MP Waluke, but critics would argue that they gave them a window for reprieve. But I want us to look at the next topic. At least you've pronounced yourself on that. Staying with the U.S. election, most people outside the U.S. first heard of Joe Biden as Barack Obama's vice president. However, Biden has been a household name in his home state of Delaware for over 40 years. Biden, now America's 46th president-elect, is an old hand in politics, and at 77 years of age has given President Trump a scare of a lifetime. KTN News' Mark Namaswa with more.
Joe Biden is a name currently garnering worldwide attention for giving President Donald Trump the most formidable threat to his political fortunes.
If you count the legal votes, I easily win. If you count the illegal votes, they can try to steal.
You know, we're proving again what we've proved for 244 years in this country. Democracy works. Your vote will be counted.
It turns out that Biden has spent almost all his working life in politics. Born in 1942 and at just 29 years old, Biden was elected as senator for Delaware in 1972. His victory was, however, followed by an accident that killed his wife and daughter. He contemplated suicide at the time. Biden studied history, then law at Delaware and Syracuse universities in Delaware. At the Senate, he showed a competitive edge in articulating the nation's policies.
Our loyalty is not to South Africa, it's to South Africans. And the South Africans are majority black, and they are being excoriated.
Growing up, Biden was mocked for being a stammerer. He worked hard to improve his speech. He first considered vying for president in 1987, but a series of challenges made him back down. 20 years later, in 2007, he stepped up, but Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton stole the show in the Democratic Party lines. Obama picked him as vice president nominee, and together they saw off Republican Senator John McCain and later Senator Mitt Romney. Biden did not vie in 2016. He had lost a son to brain cancer a few months prior. Then came Donald Trump.
And this is a case where they're trying to steal an election. They're trying to rig an election, and we can't let that happen.
The 2020 race Biden and Kamala Harris mounted to see off Trump has been regarded by pundits as a slow and relentless fight backed by many years of political experience. Spearheaded by a 77-year-old, many would easily write off.
We've gotten over 74 million votes. Let me repeat that, 74 million votes. That's more than any presidential ticket has ever gotten in the history of the United States of America.
Trump has clearly been troubled by a politically resurgent old man eating at his surprise 2016 victory and apparent reluctance to let go. Mark Namaswa, KTN News.
Well, the whole world was watching this particular election, and that want us to dissect some of the issues. When we look at the change of guard in the United States, with Joe Biden coming in now, what does that mean for Kenya? What does it mean for Kenya's relationship with the U.S.? A lot of people largely describing Joe Biden as a safe pair of hands. I'd like to start with you, Hesbon, on this. Looking at this entire electoral process, it was something akin to what we see in the third world countries, Kenya not being exempted. What was that like for you?
I think the election was fairly interesting in the sense that it brought the United States of America, this liberal world of opportunities and you know, the beacon of democracy to the fore, and everyone was looking at what was going on. You know, a president who had antagonized almost all aspects of the global politics, you know, was facing a very formidable force. And I think the ideas that were contending and, you know, the perception that people had of President Trump, his track record, what his presidency has meant and what it was portending for the future, were actually contended against what, you know, the Democrats were looking at. And to a large extent, I think you can say that democracy actually trumped. It's not like this is over, because I think we are seeing a situation where we might have a legal protraction in terms of, you know, who genuinely won and who did not win because of the pronouncements we've had from President Donald Trump. But I think from a political communication point of view, it creates, you know, a very good picture of the society that we live in today. If you look at the voting patterns, for instance, the minorities that have been voted in different positions from the Senate to the, you know, Congress and House of Representatives in the US, I think there's a diversity of people who've been elected. Mm-hmm. And then most importantly for me is the role of the young people in the United States of America. If you look at the number of young people who voted in change, you know, from Trump and then they're transiting to Joe Biden, I think there's a fairly impressive record in the sense that the whites who are young have voted for a Democrat to the tune of 53%. And then, of course, the blacks are at around 83%. Right. And that tells you a lot about the generation that you're talking about today, that we have a generation that has grown up with choices. Yes. And you want to expect that that is the same thing that would translate to other countries like Kenya, where the generation that will be voting for the first time, the millennials and the digital natives specifically, will look at ideas and probably take us from the politics of ethnic mobilization to that politics of issues. And it gives me some sense of hope that this generation will take us to the next level of evaluating politicians on their utterances, what they pretend for the democracy of our country, the development record, and their manifesto, without looking at the non-issues like tribe.
Okay, Jyotich, what is in it for Kenya with Biden now coming in for a fresh term? Of course, he's not new, being a former vice president, and looking at Kenya's relationship with the U.S. Trade went up for about, I think, 4.9% since 2018, last year. So what do we expect with this new change of guard?
Thanks. First of all, congratulations to President-elect Joe Biden, and of course, with great excitement, Vice President Kamala Harris.
That's a big one. That's a big one.
It's a big one. It's a big one. I saw a timeline of the vice president since independence, and she is the absolute first. This is amazing. She's the children of immigrants, and she's married to a white American. I mean, you look at it and you look at the coalitions that are being built. She represents so much for so many of us, and I'm really proud of her, and I congratulate them. Thinking about the Kenya-US trade agreement, I'm really looking forward to Biden's administration having a closer look at that. There are some issues, which I won't go into detail now, but need to be ironed out. And I do hope that with this Democratic presidency, we'll be able to dig more deeply into that. What struck me most about this particular victory is that the supremacy of the Constitution of the United States of America. The nation is bigger than the individual. No matter what happens, on the 20th of January, 2021, Donald Trump ceases to be the president of the United States. And I like it. I like a space like that where the nation is always going to supersede the individual. The other thing I want to talk about, counting the mail-in ballots, looking at the voting that happened. They even waited for the ballots from the servicemen and women abroad to be brought in. You can wait 2-3 extra days to count them. Every vote counted, and that struck me a lot. Yes, there might be some issues here and there, but every vote counts. And if there is something that we should look at too as Kenyans, it is the issue of our vote counting. And that's why whenever I talk about the BBI process or other things, it's electoral fraud, it's electoral injustice that is a trigger for so much hostility. And finally, Akisa, I just want to say the interest with which that Kenyans took in the elections, of course, because geopolitically, the United States is important to us, makes me wonder, these same people, and somebody was saying, if you go to these same people and say, have you seen what's happening in the news in Kenya? What's happening in South Sudan? What's happening in Tanzania, in Uganda? They don't know. They're not following it. They say, we don't want to follow that. That is so depressing. I would encourage Kenyans to understand that our neighborhood is also important in the region. Right. And that as we move away from there, we also focus on things that are of geopolitical importance to us. But really, congratulations to President-elect. And this is the supremacy of the Constitution at play and respect for electoral process.
Great.
And electoral justice.
Great. This was Jera's talked about every vote counts, voting by mail. There's a lot we've seen that's been foreign even for, those living in the US. What lessons can we pick, especially when we are having this big conversation on how to reform our electoral process? What were the key highlights for you?
Well, several things come to mind. And Donald Trump made a visit to Africa over the last 4 years and met with African dictators, he would have probably retained his position. But that's on a light note. Now, when you look at the American political system, several things come to mind. Number one, they've got institutions which are loyal to the national and public interest. Those institutions are so strong, and they're led by very strong personalities, and they're only loyal to the US government, not to personalities. That's why the states were able to declare who has won, who has lost, and that becomes final. And Trump had appointed so many judges who are said to be conservative, and he was running from one court to another, but they found some of the petitions to be frivolous. So some of the very judges, conservative judges that he had appointed, told him to take a walk. And as your teacher has indicated, the systems are so strong that when you go through the US Constitution, it declares that on the 20th, or if the 20th is on a Sunday, on 21st, the person who has been elected president officially takes over midday, 12 o'clock. And all systems are going to be aligned. Whether or not you make a concession speech, it doesn't matter. But when you go to the US and you come back to Kenya, it's very, very disturbing that in the first instance, people in America elected a gentleman who's got a very high appetite for assaulting the economy, assaulting women, assaulting institutions, and gave him the presidency. They gave him 4 years. Last evening, when I was watching the results with a number of diplomats and businessmen, there was a cumulative sigh of relief that this fella has gone home, because he has assaulted multinational institutions. Bilateral conversations have taken a backseat. Multilateral conversations have taken a backseat. because it's driving his selfish agenda. And the way Kenyans have been taking note of the US politics, we must be very worried that Kenya doesn't get into the same position as US, where we lose 4 years because we elect people who've been found guilty of corruption, people who've been squandering public assets, people who are introducing voodoo economics, and then we go and vote. And finally, the US, when they discovered that they had made a mistake 4 years ago, all of them woke up early in the morning to go and cast their ballots. But what happens in Kenya? Majority of the middle class, they would be having a single malt whiskey and yawning and saying that we cannot go and vote. And then when we elect people that I cannot name, but Mark Bichachi is very competent in naming those persons, then we start crying. We start saying that Kenya has got horrible leadership, yet you've got the powers to participate in the electoral process and invent voting people who respect Chapter 6, people who respect Article 10 of our Constitution. So these are wake-up call as we look at 2022.
Right.
Because you see a number of people have declared they're running 2022, they're coming with all manner of voodoo economics.
Yes.
Let's look at the scoreboard and elect people who will take Kenya to the next level.
Yes. Mark Bichachi, among the things that worrying a lot of Kenyans is the fate of the free trade agreement. The negotiations started in July this year, even amid COVID-19. What's really at stake when we talk about Kenya trading with the US? Because it's a large partner for us. It's important.
Yes.
And of course,
your
lessons that
is,
we can learn. Lessons that we can learn on our electoral process from the US.
Your concern is quite well placed in the sense that, number one, yes, we are in the process of negotiating a free trade agreement with the United States. At the same time, AGOA was scheduled to end by the year 2025. So this is a critical time, and the election of Biden comes as good news for Kenya, because we know that Obama's Africa stance was a much better stance than Trump's. Trump's has reduced aid to Africa, looked more inward in terms of his economical policy. He put America first to the detriment of everybody else. But even as we study Trump, I think it is critical that we study how Trump communicated as well. Trump played in the field of conspiracy theorizing, whether it was the light into our bodies to heal COVID, or the taking of malaria queen as we know it in Kenya to stave off COVID, or it was climate denialism. Trump represented a very dangerous shift in politics. And as Dismas has quite well put it, we need to be very careful and draw comparisons locally. You know, Trump famously said that if he loses an election, it is because of the deep state. That is a statement Kenyan politicians have made. Trump was committed to returning old technologies. Right. So he said he will bring back coal. There are people who are trying to bring back also equally old technologies. I will not mention them. Trump was about himself. He was about, look at me and look at what I am doing. We know that the prison prefect of Nairobi is quite into himself. So we can draw a lot of lessons from that. But finally, and most critical, let us not fall into the trap of circumstances that politicians cause themselves so that they can take advantage later. The mail-in ballot issue, right. Trump is the same one who told his people not to vote via mail-in. So for him to now say that Biden is beating him illegally via mail-in ballots was a carefully orchestrated plan to ensure that he had something to manipulate the American people by. And politicians do this all the time. Mm-hmm. They cause the crisis right. and then want to take advantage of the crisis.
Right, and trust that we see a lot of that back home here. Thank you very much. Yes. Gloria, you'll have the last word on this, on the U.S. elections. I'd like us to really keep it tight, because I'd give each of the panelists about 30 seconds to talk about the latest developments with the DP Ruto and Joshua Rapsang case at the ICC. Gloria, for you, looking at this election, how participatory it was, sometimes chaotic, what can we pick?
I'm actually very happy with the outcome, not only because we finally have a woman, vice president, but also because the role of the youth was in this election was actually seen by people. And finally, for the first time, the youth felt the need to go to the polling stations and vote, because if you look at the messaging that was being crafted around the campaign season, it was, intentionally targeting the youth. They were talking about dealing with college debts. They were talking about dealing with issues such as immigration laws. Most of our youth are affected by these things. And for me, it was really refreshing to see that they are feeling like they are a part of the process. The other thing I'm expecting now that we are going to have a Biden government is, finally we are going to have the youth. We had been in the civic spaces. Some of the funding that USAID and the US government was throwing to government was cut out. So the youth programs, for instance, the funding was cut out. Very well, HIV funds were also cut out. So I'm expecting to see that when we have this new government come in, at least we can go back into supporting youth programs. Not that we are holding our hands out for the US to help us, but that really was pushing the civic programs that we have through the community organizations.
Yes, just finish up. Just finish up. It's okay.
And so for me, it's really positive news being in this space, and I would like to challenge the youth who are in elective politics. This is now, it's like we're in a new era where women are, equal players. So when we're talking about BBI and all these other things, for me, the outcome was more about me as a woman and me as a young person in this field, and there's definitely hope for us. That's for me the resonating message that I'd like to put out.
All right. I'd like to give each of our panelists a minute because we have the latest developments. Lawyer Paul Gisheru, this week surrendering himself to the Netherlands-based ICC court. He's accused of 6 counts, mostly on bribery of witnesses for them to pull out of this particular case, 2 of whom he's said to have promised them jobs. And this has brought a lot of jitters on our political space, looking at, the biggest conversations right now and the road to the 2022 elections. I really want to pick your minds on likely implications of this on a number of the leaders involved in the ICC case and what this would mean for them. Really, let's keep time. 30 seconds each of us. I think I'll start with Jero.
Looking at the developments, I would imagine that there should definitely be jitters in the camp of, in this case, the deputy president, because for me, I find it interesting that at this moment in time, Gisheru hands himself over to the ICC. I say for always as a Kenyan that I think we really made a big mistake as Kenyans way back to have 2 people as president and deputy president who had matters in the ICC. So if this is the way that justice will be served, or if this is a Hail Mary by the opposing camp to come in and say, look, how can we further embroil the deputy president, potentially in litigation that would see him destroy his political ambitions going forward? Whatever the reasons are behind why Gisheru is right now in the ICC, it still brings back to me a very serious question as to the type of leaders we have in place in Kenya today.
Hezbon, is the timing suspect for you?
Well, I think whether the timing is suspect or not, that is what Kenyans will read because of the political undertones that will arise from all this. But from where I sit, I think it's important to just come back to what are the issues and to what extent are those issues substantive enough to be addressed. Was there justice to the victims, and did someone impede the justice to the victim? Irrespective of how it cuts that person, either politically or legally, I think the victims deserve just that justice. But then finally, it's also important to note that political power is transient and justice is perpetual. It will always catch up with you.
Bichachi, your thoughts on the ghosts of ICC returning? Should there really be jitters in the political space, and especially in DP Ruto's camp?
I ask myself a simple question. Why are we afraid to face justice as a nation? Why would we say that anyone going before a court of law, either to prove themselves innocent or guilty, is a travesty when we forget that we've got millions of Kenyans who still suffer because of post-election violence? Justice must be done.
All right, I like that. That's very simply put. Gloria, your thoughts?
Definitely the timing is questionable, especially when we've had bigwigs, heavyweight politicians coming out and saying we'll ensure that the Deputy President, William Ruto, does not has no chance. So the timing is questionable. But I also want to throw in a spanner in there. We had our President Uhuru Kenyatta commenting and saying that no Kenyan shall actually be tried in a foreign court. So I'm just wondering, what has changed?
Yeah.
You know?
What has changed? What has changed? What has changed? Okay, Dismas, you'll have the last word on this as we now listen to the viewers in the next quarter.
No, Akisa, you know, my grammar school teacher told me that the guilty are always running. And they keep on running even when there is nobody chasing them. And the reaction from some of the panelists and also our leaders point in that direction, that the guilty are always running. But at the end of the day, what is going to come up from ICC is a confirmation of some rumors, propaganda, and innuendos that in fact, some of the people who were supposed to go and give information as witnesses disappeared into thin air, or they decided to take a U-turn. So this ICC process is going to reveal to Kenyans whether in fact it's the case there was a scheme to eliminate Kenyans who wanted to give evidence, or there was a monetary consideration for them to make a U-turn. So in my view, if you are innocent, you must not be afraid. But if you are guilty, then keep on running, and you may end up running all the way to ICC.
All right, I'd like you to put a stop on that and take a quick break. You're watching Inside Politics. When we get back, and we always say this is your show too, so we'd love to hear your thoughts on a number of the topics that we've canvassed in the past 1.5 hours, from the cracks in BBI and major says, confessions to expectations of the State of the Nation address by President Uhuru Kenyatta next week on a Thursday, or this week on Thursday rather, the U.S. elections and its implications to Kenya, trade agreements, and largely the relationship between Kenya and the United States. And of course, if you have a comment on the ICC, Dismas describes it as if you're guilty, you will keep running. Mark Bichachi simply puts it as, why are we afraid of justice? It would be lovely to hear what your thoughts are on that. The number you can call is on your screen. When we get back, we'll be speaking to you to start calling.